Alright guys, so a lot of games have come out in the past couple of months, specifically, the busy time between October and now, and something that I wanted to cover back in December, right before Cyberpunk came out, was Gears Tactics. I was getting ready to do it, but I hadn't quite finished it. I wasn't quite ready to make a review on it yet, and then Cyberpunk came out, and then all that, next thing onto the next thing, Call of Duty updates, Hitman, and so here we are now. So, now, this is not so much a review, but a recommendation, I guess that's what you want to call it, of something to play. Again, it's on Game Pass, so if you're on Xbox, you can, I'm assuming you have Game Pass, get this for free. And so if you don't know what Gears Tactics is, it's a strategy turn-based game like XCOM 2, and that's really the only experience I have with these types of games is XCOM 2, so I'm going to be comparing this a lot to that. So that being said, it still takes place in the Gears of War universe that I'm not too familiar with, right? I've played, I think, Gears of War 2, 4, and 5, so I have a slight idea of what's happening, but I don't know, names and dates and events and all that stuff like a hardcore fan will. So I'm sure there's Easter eggs and a lot of hidden stuff in here that I totally missed. But I'm just going to talk more about the individual story and the gameplay. So, something I want to start out with that you've seen from the beginning of this video is the cutscenes are really high quality. It runs well on next gen. It's Series X enhanced. It looks great throughout all the cutscenes. I was expecting, no high quality cutscenes, just this thrown together kind of Hitman style, the still imaged style of cutscenes, but they're actually all really well put together. They're well voiced, looks good, sounds good, all that good stuff. So that's the cutscene and the cinematic graphics out of the way, I guess if that's what you want to call them. But let's talk more about the actual gameplay, because I think definitely in these types of games, that's what's important. So the level you're seeing here turned into a boss fight, and we'll get into boss fights later. But essentially it works just like XCOM 2 does, or any of these turn-based strategy games. You have different units: heavy artillery, vanguard, scout, sniper, all these different classes. Each one can move a certain distance, has special abilities, certain accuracy, passive, active abilities, types of grenades, all that good stuff, right? And so, in that regard, when comparing to XCOM 2, you have the Overwatch ability that you just saw there, where you cover an area and stop enemies from moving, right? All that stuff is very similar, almost identical. Where it differs drastically from XCOM 2 is it's very simplistic. And again, I'm using XCOM 2 because it's my only experience, what I'm familiar with, and I feel like it's a big enough game in this genre of turn-based shooters to really have anyone who would be interested in this probably has played that game or know what it is. So like I was saying, it's much, much simpler than XCOM 2. And there are some good and bad things with this, right? Personally, with me, with an XCOM 2, they have the whole base building system, and you can craft different things that build your base and recruit different members in order to build new facilities inside of your base, right? For me, with my first and only strategic turn-based shooter experience, that's too much. I don't need all of that, because especially with XCOM 2, it's very difficult, and if you build the wrong thing at the wrong time, it can severely impact you and get a bunch of your soldiers killed. So for me, that's all too much. Here in Gears Tactics, none of that's here, right? You don't have a base building system where you upgrade through the levels and, craft new things and new facilities and stuff. That's not here. Essentially what you're seeing is the only gameplay mechanic in the game. Now, a negative to that less fleshed out system is the customization. Now, it's still there. You can still change their chest pieces, their helmets, their legs, their boots, their guns, attachments on their guns, color of their armor, all of that stuff. It's just not as in-depth as XCOM 2, right? If you look at XCOM 2, as you level up your soldiers, you unlock new customization. 30 pairs of glasses, 54 hats, all these shirts, pants, vests, glasses. I already said that. All this crazy stuff you can unlock, completely customize your guy. None of them will look the same. Gears Tactics has that, but not to the same extent, right? You can change your guys helmet and chest armor, all the things I just listed, right? But there's maybe 7 or 8 different variants of armor, which is more than enough, and it all has stats tied to it, whereas in XCOM 2 it's purely customization. So you might not like how something looks, but it performs significantly better, so you're going to equip it. So we touched on the graphics and cutscenes, the gameplay, which you're seeing here, along with the customization. Now, along with that customization and troop management, I guess that's what you want to call it, something that XCOM does really well is the recruiting of troops, and you have your different medic classes, sniper, heavy, all that stuff, but they're independent people, right? You can lose everybody, essentially, right? Within Gears Tactics, you have the main characters and then your recruits, right? And your main characters are still subsets of those classes, those medics, snipers, heavies, vanguards, all that stuff, but they have unique abilities. Now, along with this, they also cannot die when you use them on missions, right? And not in the sense that they're invincible, but if they die, you fail the mission. Now, so the problem with this, right, them having unique abilities and them not being able to die thing, is you have absolutely no reason until you get to the point where they force you to use these random recruits like you do in XCOM. In XCOM, you recruit people, you give them names, personalities, all that stuff. You can change their birthplace and their date and their name and all this crazy stuff and all this millions of hours of customization that you can do. Here, there's not as much customization, like I said, for those random troops, so you don't really want to use them, but it gets to a point where you need a certain number of people for missions, and they force you to, even though the main characters are significantly better, so you don't really want to. And that's just a nitpicking thing, but that's something that I didn't quite enjoy. I never really had the need to use any non-main characters. Now next I want to touch on mission types. Now, within XCOM, right, and again, I'm using XCOM as a standard for these types of games, you have some civilian rescue missions, just to kill the enemy missions, secure the area, stuff like that. And this pretty much has the same exact style. You have, destroy objectives, kill enemies, go save these guys and recruit them to your team. And then there's one new, I guess that's what you want to call it, one unique mode to Gears Tactics. And that's this mode where you're on a map and it's getting bombed from south to north, bottom up, and you have to keep moving. And this, it's supposed to keep the player moving and make things intense and make it so that you have to play aggressively and you can't just sit back and play defensively like how most people would play the game. You have to keep moving and rush and make risks and all that stuff. But the problem is the rate at which the bombs move south to north across the map, and you need to combat the enemies, and you only have certain turns on each character. Unless you perform almost perfectly, there's practically no way to outrun these bombs. And so those missions are side missions, and some side missions you have to do in each chapter, and you can pick and choose, and once you learn what the symbol is and the description for these missions, you can just never choose them again. So that's why I'm not too heavily hating on those missions, but those were definitely a drag to the rest of the game. And so another gameplay thing that I want to discuss is something that I haven't gotten far enough in XCOM 2 because of the difficulty there, and let me get that out of the way now. XCOM 2 is significantly more difficult, even on the easiest difficulty. But something that this game I think does really well is uses the Gears of War universe to introduce a lot of weapons that are really cool. They have that bow that you can shoot and blow people up with, and all types of weapons from the different games that they're introduced as special weapons that when you kill an enemy you can pick them up and use them for your characters. Now, something that I think this game does very well, right, is the boss fights. I want to say there's 4 of them. There might be another one throughout the game, and for the most part, they're the big things. Again, I don't know Gears of War lore, but just the big walker things that you see on the cover of a lot of the games. I'm pretty sure it is the cover of Gears Tactics. But boss fights with those things where you have to flank certain angles and you have to hit them in the back or else you can't do damage, so you have to split your units up. That makes it unique and interesting, and a lot of the boss fights are really well done. There's good enemy types throughout, except for the final boss fight, which is what you're watching here. So my problem with this boss fight is they recycle a lot of stuff from other boss fights, right? So they have the shoulder-mounted rockets on this big tentacle monster thing that shoots at you, which makes you move every single turn unless you get hit, which I think is from like the first boss fight in the game. And then you can damage the weapons in order to make them not function, which is from the second boss fight in the game, and you get where I'm going with this. A lot of stuff is just carried over from other boss fights. And my biggest problem with this is that they don't do a good job of explaining how this boss fight works to the player. So, for example, we're talking about some of those mechanics they stole from other boss fight. Let's take the launchers that this thing has, as you see here, right? So you can shoot them to damage them, just like the other boss fights. But in the other boss fights, once they've completely taken all of the damage and been destroyed, then they're no longer functional. That's it. They're out of this rocket attack and have to use some other way to attack you. Here, without telling the player, that's not how this works. If you take out one of the rocket pods, right, that just stops it from launching the rockets for that turn. Once it goes into its next turn, it can launch the rockets again. And they don't tell you this, so you're shooting these rockets over and over and over. I want to say this boss fight, let me look at this clip right here. This boss fight took me 40 minutes to do this boss fight. And that's because a large amount of it was me just shooting these rockets over and over and over, trying to get them to be destroyed, because that's what they taught you previously, and they're reusing old mechanics, but they've changed it slightly and they don't tell the player. And so, again, this is a one-off thing, and most of the boss fights are really well designed, because, as you can see here, they have an area of effect attack, and you have to balance your skill points, or your move points, I guess, between moving out of the range of the attack, taking out any grunts that might be nearby, and attacking the boss, or else you're just going to be moving in circles forever. And so it works really well. You have to plan things really well and use your special abilities to give people extra moves and health and all that stuff. And that's just my one nitpick that I have with this boss fight. Otherwise, this works really well throughout the rest of the game. Now, my other big problem I have with this is the length of the game. It's rather short. You can probably beat it in 3 to 4 sittings of a couple of hours. Again, it's relatively short, and it is repetitive, but most of these types of games are. It's the same thing over and over again. But, so the positives, again, I just went through the problems I had, but the positives that I have for this game are essentially it takes what XCOM does really well and refines it because it has the budget of Microsoft behind it, and then takes the stuff that is a bit more complicated and too complex and not really streamlined and just throws it out the window. Now, if you like that super complex base building and facility upgrading and crafting and all that stuff, great, XCOM's your game, go play it. This isn't where you want to be. But if you want a more simplistic style, just have fun in this turn-based combat, this is where you gotta go. That being said, I don't want to make this an insanely long review, so let me just get to my rating. And so, again, I didn't want to go into too much crazy detail because the game has been out for months now at this point. A lot of people who had any interest in it have probably already played it, but for those of you that don't know what this is, or haven't seen it, or have Game Pass and looking for something to play, this is a really strong game to check out if you're into this type of game. And so I would give it an 8 out of 10, and that puts it better than good, right? It was really enjoyable. I enjoyed playing it. The downfalls of the game just brought it down a little bit. They were more slight annoyances than problems I had, but overall, I really enjoyed this one. You guys let me know what you thought of the game down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys on the next one.